What is philosophy? Interestingly enough, the meaning of philosophy is itself an ongoing debate within philosophy. Now, if we want to get some sense of where to start, we can begin with Plato's Republic. Plato, a very important ancient Greek philosopher, responsible for basically almost everything that we know about Socrates. And Socrates, as you may have some sense of, is considered the kind of grandfather, if you will, of Western philosophy. And when we read the Republic, we read there that Socrates says philosophy or the love of wisdom is identical to the love of learning. And so we know that the word philosophy itself is translated from Greek to the love of wisdom. And philosopher is translated into English as the lover of wisdom. So we get a basic grounding point that philosophy has to do with the love and appreciation and pursuit of a certain kind of learning. And as we'll explore further down the line, this kind of learning is not synonymous with what we would today think of as just intelligence or being smart, and certainly has nothing to do with the pursuit of good grades per se, but instead has to do with living a particular kind of life, a life of excellence. Now, we can also say something fairly concrete about the way that philosophy is today understood. Philosophy strives for intellectual synthesis. To put that differently, philosophy is interested in coordinating our beliefs, taking the individual pieces of our belief system and trying to see if those pieces fit together into a coherent, consistent worldview or conceptual framework. Now, this might sound simple enough, but it turns out that we are not always making a ton of sense, that our ideas, our beliefs, our principles, our thinking about the world is often in conflict. The trick is that we are not always aware of that conflict. But just because we're not aware of it doesn't mean that it doesn't have an impact on our life, doesn't mean that it doesn't produce certain kinds of difficulties that make living a good life challenging. More on that later. So to say that philosophy is interested in a kind of intellectual synthesis means that it's interested in a kind of principled thinking. It's interested in helping us, or rather, we use philosophy to help us ensure that our ideas cohere, that philosophy helps us iron out the inconsistencies and the logical contradictions, which again deprive us of what, at least from my perspective, is one of the great goals of achieving virtue. Philosophy and virtue by way of integrity, to be precise. Philosophy is a way of thinking that helps us achieve greater degrees of internal consistency, which of course manifests itself as living a particular kind of consistency. And so we can put it fairly succinctly to say that the aim of philosophy is the striving for intellectual integrity, and also, very important for ancient Greek philosophers, for ethical integrity. Now, Robert Solomon and Sally Higgins, in one of their works, explains that philosophy is about defending our ideas and, of course, at times revising those ideas. Philosophy challenges us to become more fully aware of how easy it is to be mistaken and to develop a greater openness to becoming aware of those errors. And they write in their texts on the big questions in philosophy, a belief that can't be tied in with a great many other beliefs and that can't withstand criticism may not be worth believing at all. And that's a challenging idea. It might even be perceived as a provocative idea that some of our beliefs are mistaken, that if we can't defend, which is to say, if we can't justify, if we can't reasonably explain how it is that, or what good reasons we have for holding the positions and the beliefs that we do, that maybe actually the problem is the belief itself, and maybe the belief, the idea, is holding us back from achieving a greater degree of integrity, of recognizing a truth which may allow us to more fully live and make sense of the world, encounter the truth that we have apparently been somewhat blinded to, and perhaps that blindfold has been a mistaken, false belief that we picked up on at some point in our lives. We can also say that philosophy concentrates on the critical examination of certain kinds of concepts, like really big, important, foundational concepts, the kind of concepts that are at the, as I say, the foundation, at the very bedrock, upon which the rest of our beliefs, the rest of our ideas rest or stand. Now, concepts are, as Solomon and Higgins point out, the basic units of our philosophical projects and viewpoints. And they're the basic units because they are what really allow us to make sense of and to see the world. I mean, of course, we can just sort of see the world as it is, but as William James put it, seeing the world without having the proper concepts, the proper lenses provided to us by the culture, typically, to make sense of that world, what we have is a blooming, buzzing confusion. We have noise. We have, a bunch of lines on a piece of paper, which we can't discern whether those lines come together to form what we call an A or a B or a word like God or a word like love, because we don't have those concepts. We don't have the concept of God or love. We don't have the concept of, let's say, the English language or, the French language or whatever it might be. And so concepts or ideas are the lenses which permit us to organize our sensory experiences, the sensory data that we collect, the sort of range of thoughts and feelings that we experience. And so from a philosophical point of view, words, ideas, key concepts like God and freedom and beauty and morality, words like that in their meanings are, as Solomon and Higgins point out, open to interpretations. And interpretation is the business of philosophy. And that's an interesting thought, because for many of us, interpretation is a word associated with certain creative endeavors, with art. But when we undertake the intellectual enterprise And by intellectual, I don't mean, people with PhDs or, people who think, who are a particular kind of laborer in society. I mean the kind of intellectual activity that is open to every single human being who has thoughts and ideas and the ability to engage in the most basic forms of reasoning, making sense of the world. That's the kind of basic ability that one needs to engage in this kind of interpretation, and so this kind of intellectual interpretation. And so, while we typically think of, let's say, art and creativity, creative activities, in fact, we think of artistic endeavors as being somehow uniquely creative, whereas we don't necessarily think about, ordinary interactions with another person as being, or let's say parenting, or cleaning one's house. We don't necessarily think of those as creative endeavors, but philosophy would have us interrogate the meaning of what creativity is and ask questions not only about how we deploy that concept, but about how we have constructed and made sense of or given meaning to the concept itself. And it turns out that people who think this kind of activity is unimportant end up potentially being chained by an idea, that an idea can become their master, so to speak. An idea can become like a roadmap, which one feels they must follow, or a road itself that one feels must be traversed because, one could never dare to create one's own path or contemplate a brand new roadway. And you can easily understand how limiting that could be. So philosophy concerns itself with explaining concepts, and concepts in turn significantly shape the way that we see the world. It's worth recognizing that philosophy is everywhere. As Richard T. DeGeorge contends, most modern academic disciplines are themselves rooted in ancient and medieval philosophy. And these disciplines also still have theoretical bases and presuppositions that are in themselves fundamentally and inescapably philosophical. It's unfortunate, I think, that we don't often get introduced to this philosophical element of most disciplines until we get further along into, let's say, graduate studies. But make no mistake, there are these we call theoretical or philosophical ideas that undergird even the empirical sciences. And DeGeorge gives examples of disciplines that have been shaped by philosophy to include things like political science, certainly psychology, as I said, even the physical sciences, anthropology, economics, and I would also add an important area of study like education. It's also kind of interesting or worth mentioning that the PhD, what is PhD? What does that stand for? It stands for Doctor of Philosophy. And for those who don't know, when one gets a doctorate, the significance of that, what it is expressing, let's say in contrast to a master's degree, which as far as I'm concerned, I don't know, having a master's degree kind of sounds a little cooler. I mean, do you want to be a doctor or do you want to be a master, right? But a master's degree implies that you have mastered your subject matter, whereas a doctorate means that you have contributed some new knowledge. But the fact that so many different kinds of disciplines at their highest level bestow this highest degree, and that it is a doctorate of philosophy, gives you some basic sense of the preeminence, if you will, of philosophy and how it is even still very important to quote unquote non-philosophical fields. So we could say that the humanities generally turns our attention to the fundamental questions of human existence, speaking broadly. Philosophy, by contrast, is specifically concerned with clear, consistent, and reasonable definitions of the fundamental ideas or concepts upon which our lives hinge. As I said before, God, what is God? What is the nature of God? What do we mean by this word? Lots of people believe in God, but strangely enough, they don't have the same conception of God. So they might as well be believing in something quite different. People can talk past each other. Who doesn't believe in justice? Everyone believes in justice. The socialists believe in justice. The communists believe in justice. The anarchists believe in justice. The libertarians believe in justice, but they have very different ideas about the meaning of justice. So to skip over the meaning or to presume that the meanings are so obvious that only a fool would know actually is a way of ignoring the elephant in the room. And we could say the same thing about ideas like morality and truth. How do we determine what is true? Reality, what's real? What makes something real? What is freedom? What do we mean by freedom? Somebody might say we're free. Others might say no, we're not free. And they might be observing the exact same circumstances. Two people can have the same experience and derive different conclusions from it, even though they may have access to all the same sensory data. I'm not here talking about someone who's blind, someone who's deaf, and someone who has all of those faculties and they experience an event the same, or rather experience it differently. I'm saying that people with all of those relevant faculties can experience the world differently if they have different frames of reference, different beliefs about the meaning of the world as they experience it. And so, as I said before, philosophy challenges us to seek clarity and coherence in our broader belief system.